tonight, huh?
Milo, is that you?
There, I think I got it. Hey, how you doing? I got a cold. I got the remainders of a cold. A cold in my nose. All right, the reason I'm here tonight is because this is episode 98, featuring Tony Cook, the editor of Model Railroad News. And it seems like I should feel guilty that it took me this long to broadcast this episode. Gotten way ahead on people to interview, but on the other hand, this is really cool listening to this interview like 8 months later after I talked to him, because, well, as we all know now, Tony Cook has got his product news that he does every couple of weeks. He's been on several other shows. He's become a regular member of the old AML network. So it's kind of fun listening to this. So now I don't feel so bad. I think these most of these episodes are kind of timeless because they're mostly about the information of people anyways. So I don't really feel that bad now. I honestly thought it would be a lot harder to get people to interview, and it's like the exact opposite has happened. There are so many people in this hobby to interview. I'm convinced this hobby is like way, way bigger than any of us realize. There are people all over the place that are involved with model railroading. I did a podcast. I think it's called the Podcast Review Show. And I was on that, and they were reviewing the Modeler's Life podcast, and there was two guys, and they listen to a couple of episodes, and then they tell you what they like and don't like about the podcast. And the one guy, one of the hosts, had at some point been a model railroader. And I'm thinking, I bet you half the population has some sort of connection with model railroading. That's the way I feel. Anyways, this is an episode that was originally recorded in September of 2017. It's Tony Cook. He's the editor of Model Railroad News. As we all know, he's a great contributor to the AML network. And I'm going to stop talking now because this is a really good interview. Subway chime. Go! Hey, Shane.
Hey, Lionel.
Hey, buddy. What are you doing? Hey, are you busy tonight? Are you available?
I mean, I guess I can set some stuff to the side here. I wasn't working on anything too important.
Or wait till you find out who we're going to talk to tonight, and then you'll be making yourself available.
Okay, all right. Well, go ahead and tell me, and then I'll decide how quickly to throw things off the desk.
You always make yourself available for the boss, trust me.
Of course, right. Yes.
And tonight we're going to talk to none other than Model Railroad News editor and HO Collector Quarterly, I think it's called, Tony Cook, and he's also an associate editor for Railroad Model Craftsman, is he not?
That's my understanding.
Yeah, so that's who he's agreed to talk to us. When he found out you were like going to be here, he was like, "Yeah, I'm all in."
Sweet.
So I locked him in the green room for a while.
I mean, that worked. Do you put plenty of shrimp back there?
I put plenty of shrimp back there.
Awesome, fantastic.
I
heard we were running low, and then Andy found some while he was down in the basement the other day.
Yeah, exactly.
Little dusty, but it's still shrimp.
Yeah, dusty shrimp. Didn't he play? Come on. I know this is way before your time, but I believe in the 50s, from like 55 to 61. Wasn't Dusty Shrimp the second baseman for the Cleveland Indians?
I thought he was center fielder for the Cubs.
All right. Well, he did move around the league after he got into that melee with the third baseman's wife. So.
Well, it happens.
It does. It's life. It happens. Life happens, man. So anyways, that's who we're talking to, Tony Cook, and you know him well.
I do.
All right.
That is true.
It is. Let's get him out of the green room and get this shindig underway.
Sounds good.
I'll leave that up to you.
All right. Hey, Tony, get in here.
Hey, Shane, how you doing?
Not too bad. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for the invitation to come and be on the podcast, and looking forward to it. Very exciting stuff. How are you guys doing this evening?
We're doing great. We prefer if our guests sit on the couch there, but at the one end, it's a little bubbly. It's a little slimy. Somebody McGurked on it, so you're best to stay at the opposite end.
Fancy stuff. Wow, very nice.
And
Very nice.
we have a radiation suit for you and everything. So, so Tony, I feel like I kind of know you because I keep hearing from Shane, who's been on our podcasts almost a year now. Shane and I had a very pleasant initial meeting where we just happened to bump into each other and exchanged a couple of pleasant emails.
Very formal. Very formal.
Yeah, very formal. Here's what happened. So I'm a one-man show on the podcast pretty much. So whenever I put out a new podcast, which is every other week a new interview, I try to take a picture that relates to that particular person, a picture of their layout or a picture of their favorite railroad or something. So the interview that I was publishing at that time was none other than Model Railroad YouTube sensation James Wright.
Oh, I know James. Great guy.
Yeah, great guy. And
Fantastic.
yeah, he is. And so anyways, I went on to his YouTube channel and I couldn't really find many interesting photos on his Facebook page. So I went on his YouTube channel and thought, oh, no problem. I'll just freeze frame something and take a picture from one of his YouTube channels. And because I'm an old guy and I get easily confused, I looked at one video, then I went, oh, there's nothing there. So I went to the next video and I went, perfect. This is a perfect picture. What was the picture of, Shane?
It was a UP SD70M that I had done some work on for a guy, HO scale.
Yeah. So I take this picture and I'm thinking, perfect. This will be James Wright's picture, thinking it was from James Wright's video. And I post it up there. And about 3 hours later, I get this email from this guy going, hey, you can't put that up there. That's not you. That's not James Wright. That's Jason Stiles, my buddy Jason. You got to take that photo down. And I very politely said, okay, relax. And then he said, you got to, and then there was another email. And I'm like, hey, and I'm thinking it's some guy living in his, some 40-something guy living in his mother's basement, right? Getting all hyper because they took the wrong photo. And I'm like, I changed it. So to be completely honest, I got a little testy in my emails. And finally I said to Shane, I said, like, if you don't like the podcast, stop listening to it. And the next email from him is like, well, okay, but, like I really like doing my YouTube channel and I really like your podcast and all that. So I'm thinking, all right, just to prove myself right, I'm going to say sent him an email saying, send me a picture or send me the address to your YouTube channel and I'll look at it. Thinking, convinced it was some 45-year-old guy living in his mom's basement with nothing to do other than aggravate me. So he sends me the link and I look at it and I went, holy smokes, is this kid ever cool? So then, and it kind of went uphill from there. From there, it just went, I said to him, hey, now you got to be on my podcast. And away we went. And that's how I met him. How did you meet him?
Well, it's kind of the same sort of thing, although not with, I don't think he wrote me any upset with anything. Like, but I've had that exact kind of thing happen with website and other things at times. And, often it is just, now what are we talking about? And I got to go look at it and see, what got wires crossed. I think I found Shane on YouTube that I was looking at different model train and prototype railroad stuff. And, here he comes on and he's talking about, I think it might have been UP 844 or some kind of Union Pacific thing. And then I happened to hear him mention the Kansas City N-Track group that he and his grandfather are part of. I'm like, wait a minute, Kansas City, where's this kid at? And then I look again and, I send him an email and find out, lo and behold, he's like 20 minutes from my front door. And it's like, wow, that's so cool. And he just has got so much talent and so much excitement for the hobby. It was a natural that I wanted to have him. I think the first thing, Shane, let me know if this is right. The first thing you did was we were running a series of guest editorials on the state of the hobby, because Shane's not old enough to know, but Lionel, I'm sure you are, that, the hobby's been going away or changing for the last, well, I guess since it was invented, basically.
Exactly.
Yes.
It's been disappearing since it started, yeah.
Well, to give you an example of that, I can remember as a kid who couldn't see over the counter of a hobby shop in the early 70s, and guys, would say to me, so what's, these older guys, what steam engines do you like? Or, asking me like a 5 or 6 year old kid. And of course, steam engines, no, I like diesels. Oh, that's ruined the hobby. It's ruined railroading. That once and at that time, steam was what, about 10 years
Yeah.
past its use.
Yeah.
This had been again early 70s, so about 1960s, the end of steam, I guess, completely. And to me, well, I never saw steam. I don't care. And even to this day, I appreciate steam, but it doesn't excite me that much. And again, I think Shane is that same he just reviewed some SD40-2s for me. And I remember him asking for some background information, and I got him, I think it's Greg McDonald's excellent book on locomotives. I picked up a copy of that, and then it hit me like, well, yeah, an SD40-2, what introduced in 1972. It's like this kid is how many years away from that they're still around today. But again, it's like, well, that's really old. It'd be like asking me, tell me about this Baldwin 280 consolidation. I have no idea, or I'd have to go look. I don't know. But so it's funny when you hear that, and I've gone off on a tangent here, but the thing about, the hobby this or the hobby that, and it's like, no, it's just always changing. And I think, again, it's like the weather. It looks bad, it looks good, but give it a few minutes and it'll look different.
Well, we'll get into it later, but as far as I'm concerned, and Shane's heard me say this 1,000 times by now, I'm convinced the hobby's growing like crazy right now. Because
I agree too.
Because of the internet and people's easy access to it.
Well, in the technology, and that's one of the reasons why Shane wrote that editorial, and he's done a couple of product reviews. He did a great one for Intermountain's new N-Scale SD40-2s, and really got into some of the things about the DCC and other stuff that it did. And again, there's still a lot of people. I worked in a hobby shop for a number of years, about 10 or more years ago, and there's a lot of people, I don't even want to hear about DCC. That no, that's ruined the hobby.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, that is so opened the hobby up that, in fact, an old dog learning new tricks. I've been playing with Pico's Smart Control, and I don't know if either of you guys have had a chance to experience it, but it's it's an Android-based handheld throttle. And
Wow.
you talk about easy DCC stuff, because I get tripped up with a lot of the CV programming and setting that kind of stuff up, or, okay, I got two PAs, how do I flip the other one to point the other direction, and this is an MTH model, and what is it, their value, what do they put in that? And this thing essentially is pretty, with the Android app that Pico used for Smart Control, you just go in and almost, point it like, I want it to go this direction, and it writes and does that. It's like, wow, how'd they do that?
Wow, that's cool.
It takes a lot of the work out of it.
Yeah,
but again, that's why the hobby's growing, though, is things like that is such a whole new dimension from what was, a gold Tyco hand warming power pack that would, eventually blow up. So,
yeah, use them as a bed warmer as well as
exactly.
Well, and it's cool because, like, I was so excited when Shane told me about writing it, because it was right around the time we met, Shane, that you wrote that editorial.
Yeah, it was probably about 2 months or so when I started actually appearing on the show. So we had been talking for a little bit, but we hadn't actually sat down, never really talked about a whole lot beyond some little show stuff. But
yeah, and then you wrote that editorial, and you were very excited about that. I remember, and it was a pretty cool thing. And I'm sitting here going, wait a minute, you're writing an editorial for Model Railroad News. How did you manage that? Because, it took me, I was 39 before I ever had my first article in MR. And I'm thinking, this kid's 20 years ahead of me, and he's already written editorials, And it's cool that you're so open-minded about it, because the more he started talking about Tony Cook, the more I'm thinking, I got to talk to this guy, because he's very obviously open-minded about the hobby and a huge asset to the hobby. So that's why I tracked you down like a mad dog. So did you start in the hobby like everybody else then? The train set going around the Christmas tree?
I guess so. I've been in my early 50s. My dad actually worked at Walthers in Milwaukee.
Really?
In the late 60s. He worked in printing and decals.
Wow.
And was a hobbyist himself, both prototype railroading and model railroading. And throughout the 70s, he custom painted mostly. I grew up seeing Mopac and Frisco because he painted for St. Louis hobby shops. We lived in central Illinois between Springfield and St. Louis. So I was never a big fan of either of those roads. I was more GM&O and ICG, but of course the guys in those shops wanted, it was always that vermilion and white Frisco or the Jenks Blue Mopac, one after another Athearn Blue Box units being painted. And, that was kind of how he paid for the hobby in a lot of respects. And that was kind of my entry to it as well, was watching him custom paint and work on things.
Well, how cool is that? So your dad worked for Walthers from, did you ever live in the Milwaukee area, or he worked from home?
No, I think he was up there in 68. I remember that was one of my first, I don't remember it, but I rode the GM&O with my mom from Alton, Illinois to Chicago, and then to Milwaukee on to Milwaukee to visit Dad that he worked that summer. He was basically like just out of high school, college age.
Okay.
It was like 68, yeah.
Well, that's cool.
And sadly, I don't remember it. There's pictures of me dressed up in like a little engineer overalls, and I was told that I cried a lot during the trip, which if you put me on a GM&O passenger train today, I promise I won't cry other than out of just the excitement of wow. So, yeah.
Okay, so so your dad worked for Walthers in his college years kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And then you guys lived in the middle of Illinois around Springfield.
Right. Weekends would have been spent, like Springfield, Decatur, Hannibal on the N&W. Springfield had the Chicago and Illinois Midland, Peoria with the Toledo, Peoria, and Western, and then up to Chillicothe to watch Santa Fe to see some real railroading. We'd go up and do that, and we were on it would have been the GM&O, then the ICG line that splits just north of St. Louis and goes over to Kansas City. We were on that end, so kind of a one train a day of old F units would wander through, and that's what I grew up seeing.
Wow, and so as a part-time job, your dad custom painted locomotives?
Correct, yeah, did that for the hobby, and he was always HO, and I've always basically been HO. Dabbled a little in the other scales, and more so since I've done magazine work, obviously, but always kind of been an HO guy, as is my dad, and more so on the collecting side of things. That, yeah, like dad's still getting ready to build his layout.
Oh,
he's in his mid-70s, so and he's retired, so
right.
There's no more excuses, but there still is no more track in the basement either than there ever has been before. So
that's a big part of the hobby too. There's a lot of people that never get around to building that layout, but they've always been involved. They build models, or they love the prototype or whatever. You don't have to have a layout to be a model railroader.
No, I agree there, and I have emails and letters that confirm that, of people that read Model Railroad News, keep up with the new products, and yet, don't have a layout. They collect, they buy the things. Some of them don't even buy a lot of the stuff. That it is just that interest. They buy a few things here and there, but again, it's just the fascination of it. And it's entertainment. Our publisher, Kevin Udaley, has said that before in editorial meetings when we kind of get on hot topics and other things, is, we're really selling entertainment. Are we selling reviews? Are we selling news? Are we selling how-to? And it's like, well, really, we're selling however many pages of color entertainment to flip through and look at and go, ooh and ah,
Yeah, exactly. So you've been a model railroader all your life then?
Exactly, yep. I think my first train set I was not old enough, which I think almost every dad buys his kid a train when the kid's not old enough to operate it, but that's, how it is. I think it was a Santa Fe Tyco F unit set that Dad repainted the F unit to GM&O.
It's going to be GM&O, damn it, and you're going to like it.
and true to Tyco, I think it ran better in reverse and very poorly forward.
At Mach 2 in reverse.
Sadly. There you go.
I never did figure that out. So during your teenage years and college years, did cars and girls take over, or did you still stay in the hobby all the way through? Or
cars very much I got interested in, but no, the hobby's always both shooting, prototype, going out rail fanning, and stayed with the hobby to greater and lesser degrees. Got really interested in like video and audio stuff in the 80s when all that kind of thing was new, collected Laserdiscs and Laserdisc movies, and actually wrote for a Laserdisc publication in the 80s that reviewed and presented news on new things coming out for that format. So that's kind of my writing comes from some of that. And then in college, journalism was one of the things that I did as kind of a minor. So, and I was in radio broadcasting for a number of years in the late 80s to early 90s. So that also is kind of that journalism or writing background.
Oh, cool. So where were you in radio broadcasting?
St. Louis area,
Okay.
with public affairs director for one of the FM stations. I was the guy that did those Sunday morning at 5 a.m. shows about, yeah. Exciting.
So you're talking about video laser discs. I invested pretty much my entire personal fortune in that. Was that a bad idea?
Well, I mean, in retrospect, it was a wonderful system, and anybody that saw it was always amazed with it over like VHS or beta. That wow, look at this quality, and this is amazing. But boy, it took it forever. They brought it out in the late 70s. Just about the same time as video cassettes, and then they had the format wars between, RCA had a needle and groove like vinyl record system to play discs, and then MCA Philips and Pioneer had the laser based, which spawned the CD and later the DVD, which was always a better system but didn't quite have the muscle of RCA. But then RCA gave up on it, so it's kind of one of those. It was always the year of the video disc for about 10 years running, and it really never was.
So. Okay, so I mean, this is Shane. This guy's like really interesting.
I know, right?
I know. It's like I have like I don't know which direction to go in next. So, all right, the podcast is called The Modeler's Life. So it's not just about model railroading, because I always envision it to be like you're at your local club and 40% of the conversation is about trains and model railroading, and 60% of the conversation is about people and what they're doing in their life. So. Is that what you took in college then, or university, was journalism and broadcasting?
I started with that in community college and then finished up with, I have an MBA in marketing and worked for AMC theaters in the late 90s and was in St. Louis, Denver, Kansas City. And then when I was in Kansas City, it was at an opportune time. It was during the renovation of Union Station. And it was the big landmark bi-state tax incentive that brought both Missouri and Kansas to the table to get Union Station, which opened in 1914, renovated, because it at the time, in fact, I can remember taking a train trip with my dad from Kirkwood, Missouri to Kansas City a few years before, and you had the little Shack that sat off to the side, and Union Station was basically a dilapidated mess that some people were looking at demolishing and turning into office buildings. Right. And luckily that tax incentive came through in 99, and the station was renovated and is now Science City and has like an IMAX theater and planetarium, as well as it's the location for like the Chamber of Commerce, and a number of important places in Kansas City have offices there. And I started there in May of 2000, right, and it ended up being their marketing person. So I was the guy that, again, 5 o'clock in the morning on TV ahead of like the Today Show, telling people about the dinosaurs or, Princess Diana exhibit or, whatever was coming to Union Station. So I think I finally got into magazines because I knew there'd be no 5 a.m. on TV or radio.
Or no 5 a.m. Sunday morning thing.
So, no early calls, yes.
So how did and you say you were in collecting, like you have them. Is that what it's called, the HO Collector? And it's
yes, the new
quarterly magazine.
It's a quarterly, and White River Productions started it. In fact, right now I'm working on the layout for our fourth quarter 2017 edition. So it's 4 times a year. It's $8.99, and I co-edit it with a friend of mine, Tony Lucio from Kentucky, and we are both avid hobby historians and collectors. And that end of my interest really got rekindled in the late 90s, because growing up as a kid, Dad always had a stack of the product catalogs for like, Tyco and some of the other like train set or entry level stuff.
Right.
But Athearn, Roundhouse, those kind of things were what I was able to have and work with, that I couldn't have the toy stuff. So yeah, no Spirit of 76 train sets. It was more prototype, which was great because it gave me that basis where it was more of a hobby or a modeling pursuit and not just, a toy that goes round and round as fast as you can make it go.
Right.
But then it's kind of one of those, and I think this is something that eBay and other things have really hit a lot of people with. In the mid-90s, I went into a hobby shop in the St. Louis area, and they had one of the Tyco Chattanooga Jeep 20s and a 1980 Tyco product catalog sitting in a group of pre-owned items. And again, that was completely off limits. There will be no Chattanooga Jeep 20s on the train board. And it was like, I never had one of these. And again, the colorfulness, and then it was like, I want one of those. And I bought the thing, took it home, and then kind of got more interested in, hey, there's so much that's been out over the years, this being like 20 years ago. And at that point, injection molded plastic was approaching the half century mark. That
Right.
trains as we know it, made out of a plastic shell, etc., hit in the early 1950s. So there's this whole history of things and companies and products that have come and gone. And where do you find out more about it? And the internet was new and big. It's like, well, certainly somebody is documenting and putting like Tyco catalogs and information online. And there was not. And that's kind of where I started, was more kind of for myself. And I wanted to see this, have this out there. eBay was brand new. So suddenly there was that, oh my gosh, you can search, and from all over the country, there's people selling all this old stuff that would be the equivalent of a couple of hundred swap meets all at once on my computer screen.
Right. Yeah.
Like, this is incredible.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where it got going there with the HO Scale Trains resource was put online that same summer I started at Union Station. And I started with Tyco, and then I started getting emails of, hey, what about AHM? What about Bachmann? What about, and it just kind of expanded from there. I picked up all the catalogs I could and kept building those sites. In fact, those sites now just moved to a new White River production server, is now hosting it. So we have a new, better home for them. And that was really that was the impetus that got me into the magazine. I think that was the recognition they had of me when I was offered Model Railroad News as an editor in 2011. And then again, that site is just kind of grew to a life of its own, to where I had originally pitched HO Collector to Kevin and Nadine Udaly, the White River production owners, and said, hey, I'm thinking about doing this as a thank you for people that donate to my website. But then the more I looked at doing a little publication, I was going to do it as kind of a PDF to give out to people that, would do like a PayPal donation of $5 or $10 to the site.
Right.
Here, thank you, and here's a little, whatever. And I said, but the more I look at this, what if we gave this a real shot as a publication? And we went ahead, committed to it for 2017, and I'm happy to say it's very close to being in the black and on its way. So, surprise. Yeah, there are people with an interest in old HO, which a lot of people don't. I mean, when you talk Lionel, you say American Flyer, there's the TCA, the train collectors. I mean, that's just kind of a de facto thing. The minute you say Lionel, people, I have one up in the attic that was my grandfather's.
Yeah.
I bet it's the fortune. That they kind of overlook the fun, or it's the value and the collectability, and that's all great. But a lot of times HO isn't looked on that same way. Same with N-Scale, as well, that it's like, well, that's not collectible. And it's like, well, yeah, very much is. A lot of it's well over 50 years old. And, look at the value some of the things get on eBay, and guys like myself, are at that age where those are things we had as kids. And so it really is an interesting thing to see other people sharing that. And that's been the greatest thing of this first year for both Tony Lucio and myself is, we're not the only two crazy people out there.
Okay, so we're going to pause here for a second because I'm going to pat myself on the back, which Shane is used to, because I started this podcast mostly to hear the sound of my own voice and just thought, it'd be fun to talk to people and see if anybody listens and stuff. And I constantly end up talking to unbelievably interesting people, which you have now fallen into that category of quickly, because this while you were talking, I pulled up HO Scale Trains resource, and to be completely honest with you, I wasn't really that much aware of it. I probably had heard of it once or twice before, but like you talked about the history of the hobby, like this is really neat, Shane, because we've never really talked to anybody that was interested in the history of the hobby.
Right.
And this, and start, like you say, I see here it started as the Tyco Trains resource, and it's just been an endless, obviously it's been a constant progression of more and more success of, like you say, finding people that are interested in this. And it's fascinating. It's fascinating to hear you talk about it, and it's fascinating. So do you feel like your love of older trains is simply because it's something that you were, like you say, your dad, was more of a prototype guy, and you didn't really get your chance to have the Tyco set going around. And they are colorful. For starters, they are very colorful.
Oh, and you page through those, especially the 1970s, was such an explosion that Tyco had been around for. Mantua creates its name in the early 50s, but like the 70s, there's a big period in the late 50s with like Lionel goes into HO in 57, Revell comes out in 56, and like Gilbert has kind of a resurgence with Gilbert, American Flyer, and that early plastic ability brings Varney and all those people heavily, into a new market. And it kind of comes and goes, and then slot cars are huge for like 63 to 64.5, and trains kind of take a back seat, and then the space race made that kind of stuff, like trains seem a little passe. But the early 70s, there's another big push, like Cox starts selling Athearn-made trains, Bachmann expands from just Plasticville buildings into a full-scale line of both HO and N. Lionel comes back to HO in 74, Model Power comes out. AHM really hits their stride big time in the late 60s. That HO was such an exciting world at that time, and all these product catalogs and all these things coming out, that, again, I think that was a real connection for me to go back to and document that time, because I couldn't find it anyplace. Again, you look for Lionel history or collectible things, there's books, guides. There was no Greenberg's Guide to AHM, and that was kind of the desire I had, and have luckily found a lot. In fact, the AHM stuff tends to run ahead of Tyco anymore. Tyco at first was always the thing most people were interested in, but AHM is just as strong. And it was, and I'm sure, Lionel, you remember it, was kind of crossed that line of both. It was that entry-level toy train stuff, but they did enough freight cars and their amazing Rivarossi steam engines and things that, every serious modeler obviously had, AHM passenger cars or something on their layout. And I find that's a big response thing that we have now. In fact, this new HO collector I'm putting together, Vic Roseman, who you probably know him. He lives in New York and is a longtime writer for various magazines, did a number of projects with Bernie Paul at AHM, and we've got a number of things he talks about in a story on AHM and his Rivarossi connection, kind of some behind the scenes of how did this happen and how did they get into business, which I think will be a really fun article for a lot of people with that interest in that company.
God, it's like just endlessly fascinating, Shane. I just find this to be fascinating. Somebody that's interested in the history of the hobby. I mean,
it's cool because you meet a lot of people that are interested in the history of trains and stuff like that. But, like you said, it's really rare to find somebody who's interested in that history of the hobby and where the hobby has gone from when it first started to now. And it's pretty unique.
Yeah. Like, do you get the sense, Tony, that you're doing a service for the hobby, like almost a thankless service for the hobby? Because there is so much, like, I'm looking at, I went to the books page, Building Scenery with Paul Scholes. Well, like, I remember that book like as if, I remember laying in bed, reading that book as a kid, or the HO, American O scale, 27 to 65. Like I remember all that stuff, and it's kind of like, well, this is cool. Like, it's like just the fact that somebody has taken it upon themselves and is interested in this. So I'm almost speechless, to be honest with you. And I mean, that doesn't happen very often, does it, Shane?
Not really. Honestly, if we're being blunt here.
Yeah. So this is such a cool. So you had the HO scale resource, on the internet, and then somehow Kevin knew of you or found this website and kind of started tracking you, that kind of thing.
I actually started ahead of that. The previous owners of Model Railroad News is where I first started with the magazine, and then the Dailies acquired the magazine within about a year after I'd been the editor. And again, Model Railroad News is a monthly that's been around for it's going on 25 years. Yeah. And it's nice in that we have the real estate available in that magazine to go in depth and do a 4 or 5 page review of a product that, where like the reviews we put together for Railroad Model Craftsman, we've only got a couple of pages, maybe 2,000 words, 2 or 3 pictures, and that's about the same that Model Railroader has to devote to it, because they've got other callings. They're there to show you, how to build a 4x8 layout or how to do trees or scenery.
Right.
And Model Railroad News is unique in that it is there. News is in the name, and that's what it's about, is presenting new product information and those really in-depth reviews where I show prototype pictures. I've got, in addition to Shane, we've got a number of great reviewers. David Audie has reviewed for us for years. He's from the St. Louis area. Tony Lucio does reviews for us as well. And always new people come to the fold. Ryan Crawford out of the Springfield area has been reviewing for me recently, and he's another one that I just finished Burlington Northern Scale Trains SD40-2 review that he did. And it's always exciting to read things you don't know that you thought you did. It's like BN had so many SD40-2s. What is this review really going to say other than they had thousands of them, whatever. And it was such an exciting piece. And that I'm always surprised with getting to read, other people's reviews and the information they've come up with and the pictures they have of the prototypes and the things they find about the models. And that's really the big thing on Model Railroad News, is it is kind of that hands-on, really in-depth look at a model rather than just, here it is, it has DCC, it has sound, this is what it retails for, and these are the road names, because that's about all the space we've got.
Yeah.
And it's a great magazine for that. And Model Railroad News, maybe it was 2 or 3 years ago, I started adding in the back end that from the archive section, which was also part of the start for HO Collector, of whenever we'd have, say, a new whatever, like this SD40-2 come out from Scale Trains. Well, what was the first SD40-2 and when did it come out? And that kind of just like the nightly news will have that little end piece on, a little human interest story. Model Railroad News had from the archive of, well, here's the latest whatever, and here was the first one that came to market, and it was getting a lot of response too, so that helped bring HO Collector about as well as, hey, this could be a whole magazine all of its own.
This is going to sound really, for lack of a better word, stupid. What's another word for stupid, Shane? Unintelligent? But you know what? This reminds me of, let's see if I can verbalize my thought here. And you'll quickly realize, Tony, that I have a vocabulary of about 12 to 15 words. But see, this reminds me of, you'll see something, you'll see HO Collector, or you'll stumble across, the website, or you'll be looking, like you say, in the back of Model Railroad News, and you're kind of your feel good piece, and it's kind of like, oh yeah, sure, big deal. But it's like, if there's nobody doing it, you're going to be really unhappy that somebody didn't take a hold of this and do this, because this is like really important. It's one of those things that's really important, but you don't realize it until it's not there. Does that make sense?
Exactly. And you probably knew or know of Lee Riley, who passed away, just in the last year or so. He was with Bachman,
right,
most recently. And Lee had been in the hobby for, forever. And
yeah.
I could spend the entire afternoon on the phone with Lee talking about the history. And that was one thing that Lee always said, was this stuff's not going to get told, that these people are, like Irv Athern passed away in 91 or 2, who's going to document this? Who's going to tell this stuff, that it's not being preserved, it's not being talked about? He said this is so important. And the sad thing with Lee, we'd talked about so many projects, and, he'd retired from Bachman, and I think it was within like a week or two, he passed away. And that was always his, well, once I retire and all these other people are gone, I'll be able to talk about them and tell these stories.
Right.
And sadly, we never got there. But so that's one of my inspirations too in documenting that, is it was something that just the excitement in Lee's voice. Oh, Tony, you got to tell this. This is, I remember that. And, what everybody needs to know is this is what they were trying to do, or this is so. And it was just, you could tell he had that same excitement. And that's, as you say, a lot of people don't realize their interest in the history, until they do see something or start talking about it. And then suddenly, you just light up with, oh yeah, I remember I had that, or, I tried to build that kit. It was, like whether it's the front range center beam kit that people will still curse about. I remember that. And it's funny too, to talk to people now that are in the hobby on the business side, that again have such curious starts to things, like, and I hate to out him on it, but David Liebach from Tangent Scale Models, do you know his start with model trains?
No, I don't.
Well, he makes probably some of the best.
Right, yeah.
HO, yeah. Makes these wonderful freight cars and has been in the business for 10 years making these unbelievable replicas. His first train set is the chrome-plated UP Century 430 Tyco Silver Streak from 1979.
Right, exactly.
So, and again, it's like, wow. So, anybody that wants to berate Tyco, it's like, well, I hate to tell you, but the reason we have Tangent today is thanks to Tyco.
Exactly.
It's like,
yeah.
oh, wow. Yeah.
I was thinking while you were describing it, you know what this is like? It's like, my first real vehicle was a 1967 6-cylinder Ford F-150 pickup truck, and I put mag wheels on it and, our Baby Moon hubcaps, and I put a tachometer on the dash. And I mean, I thought I was just the guy in my little town, driving around in this six-banger with 3 on the tree. And it's like you wouldn't, and then you go through a stage where you wouldn't be caught dead with the thing. And then you go, then you go through back to a stage of like, oh man, I wish I had that truck again. Cause it was it was so unique. And
exactly.
And it's the same stuff. Like I started out, my stuff was Lionel, and I always say, I always use the example when I was 5 or 6 and I came down, I would have been 5, I guess. And I came downstairs, my train was going around the tree with my name on it. So,
oh, wow.
So I mean, Lionel Lines, and it was a Jeep 7. And, then I was exposed to, I grew up in Toronto and exposed to a fella named, George Olyu, who owned a store called George's Trains. It was very famous and still exists and is run by his
I've heard of it. Yeah,
sons. Yeah, and recently I discovered somebody I knew lives just down the street from my homestead, my family's homestead, and the whole 9 yards. And it's like, this is important stuff. So now I have a question for you that I've never been able to answer, but you might have some. Like this hobby, I think, is way bigger than anybody realizes. Like, I think it's huge. But it's like I always described it as like being a member of MI6. You loved being part of it, but you weren't allowed to tell anybody.
And I don't know what that is, but it surprises me how many people will say, "Oh, my grandfather has trains," or "Oh yeah, my brother's got a big train set up in his basement." And again, yeah, it's like you say, maybe we need to dress. Living here in the northwestern part of Missouri, when it's hunting season, I don't have to wonder who the hunters are. I walk in to sit down to have breakfast, and every guy in camouflage or fluorescent orange is obviously a hunter. But, maybe as rail fans and model railroaders, we're not as obvious. But I would agree that does seem to be so much bigger than it is. That there are, in fact, I remember recently looking over some list to discover that there was a Model Railroad News subscriber here in my hometown, which is only like 2,000 people. So right. I thought, I'm sure there's nobody else in town that, and yes, and I've even had like my mail carrier says, oh yeah, I know 2 or 3 people here in town that, have train setups. One guy's got like a G scale in his backyard, and, she brings me train stuff, to the porch with deliveries. It's like, yeah, this guy has, it's like, oh wow. So, I mean, again, it is, but you don't seem to know about it as much, I guess. But you go to any swap meet and it's surprising, all the people milling around. We just had, I'm sure, I don't know, I don't think I saw Shane at it, but the one, what is it, Shane, the Mid-America meet that's there at the KCI Expo by the airport?
The Mid-America Train and Toy Show.
Yeah, and that's a great show, and I think it's, 4 times a year here in the Kansas City area, and I went to it just a few weeks ago, and again, I'm always surprised at the number of people, and was happy to see a number of guys had HO Collector with the Athearn Blue Box diesel timeline. That most recent one was sitting out like next to their, cup of coffee or whatever they were doing. It's like, oh, cool, wow.
Yeah. So what is the I don't know, what's the magazine, the circulation of it?
Right now, it's still growing because it's new. It's
sure.
in hobby shops. It's in like the Barnes and Nobles, and some of those are testing it out. As I say, it's close to going into the black, but specific numbers I haven't seen since we did the last issue in July. So I generally wait and let it surprise me when I go to press, and I go to press in mid-October, so I'll get fresh numbers then. But,
okay. And
and again, it's a surprising thing too that kind of goes against the trend, because again, you hear things, magazines that no, you can't, that's something old, the internet, this or that. And, no, it really, again, the model railroad demographic, while there's lots of young guys like Shane, there's a lot of older guys like me, and I assume you too, Lionel, that have some, seasoning behind, we've been around for a while. And magazines are still, in fact, that's one thing I get a lot from Model Railroad News is I get letters, handwritten letters, phone calls and things from people that aren't that much online but are still very active model railroaders. So it's definitely an important connection.
Well, and a friend of mine is Otto Vondrack.
Oh, Otto's yes, he's he helps me with, he does our websites. So all the website stuff you see for White River Productions, he has a hand in that. Right. Otto helps me with the layout and design of HO Collector. Great guy, and very much into the hobby, both modeling and prototype. He's the news editor and works on Railfan Railroad for us.
And his father's Ed Vondrack, but not that Ed Vondrack, a different Ed Vondrack. Because there was because that's the show. Because the first time I don't know how long Otto and I have been friends, probably 15 years, something like that, and somehow we got talking, and he says, "My dad is Ed." I said, "Your dad is Ed Vondrack?" And he goes, "Not that Ed Vondrack, a different Ed Vondrack." And I'm thinking, what is the coincidence of that? Because, so, all right, let's talk about publishing, because you're deep into it. And White River seems to have found a way of, like, I love the new Railroad Model Craftsman. I fall all over it because of the production quality of the thing. And it's like, it's kind of hard. Like, I don't care that the internet is there and there's so much easy access. Like the new Railroad Model Craftsman or Railroad, your Model Railroad News or whatever. The production quality of these magazines just makes you want to pick them up and read them.
And that's definitely a credit to the dailies. I mean, that first and foremost, Kevin's been in book publishing since the early 1990s. He did a Missouri Pacific Motive Power and some Santa Fe Motive Power books. Dale Sanders, who's just amazing, in the book world, has done things for him. And the dailies very much are, it's top of the line stuff. I mean, HO Collector's the first magazine that I've been in charge of doing any layout. Right. That I don't do layout for Model Railroad News. And it's really been a learning experience to see that exactness. So, like, that's why our magazines look so good, is because, it's like, nope, that's not going to work. It's got to be better than that. It's a really quality organization. And we just picked up, Narrow Gauge Gazette, Bob Brown's publication, right, is now part of White River. And naturally we have Railfan and Railroad, Passenger Train Journal that Mike Schaefer and Kevin Holland do. I mean, it is such a, when they first bought Model Railroad News, I think that was the first monthly. And before that, they had done Historical Society, and we still do. White River does about 20 different Historical Society publications. And so in addition to those books and then the magazines, which has really taken off, I guess it was 2012 that they picked up Model Railroad News. And at the time, I think Railroads Illustrated and the NMRA magazine, which, is not sold to the public, but it in a way is kind of like the Historical Society publications, I guess. Right. It's done on contract basis for the NMRA. But as far as what White River was producing on a regular basis for periodicals, they had the contract for the NMRA magazine, and then we had Railroads Illustrated that was maybe bi-monthly or quarterly, right, which was the old CTC board. So Model Railroad News was kind of the first public monthly. And I look at it now, and there's Railfan and, Railroad Model Craftsman, we had Passenger Train Journal, that was already in the right, White River fold. But now it's and that's usually the joke of whenever I talk to somebody, well, what's the next magazine? What's Kevin bought? What has he got recently?
Yeah.
It's like, there seems to be no end in sight, but it's, and it's great because that synergy works so well for our titles. We did the Chessie Steam Special, which, was that hit its 40th, I think, anniversary from the mid-70s. Right. All our magazines had things on Chessie this past summer. We've got Penn Central, believe it or not, will be 50 years old next year. Right. Which Doesn't that seem? How's that
Yeah.
possible?
Yeah,
But
exactly.
yeah, Penn Central at half a century, and then you have somebody like Shane that is like Penn Central. What? It's like, oh, yeah, that's way back there. But so we'll have a 50th anniversary run in all the different titles, Rail Fan and Model Railroad News and such on Penn Central things. I think next February is the target for those to appear. And again, having all those magazines works for that knowledge base. And naturally, Kevin Udaley's a big collector of slides. That's my off time, is to go out to visit them in the country and work on his slide library, sorting and putting together what we have on slides and scanning things for the magazines. And that is amazingly exciting. Like he has the Jim Boyd collection and things like that that are such a benefit. When you look, like this current issue of Model Railroad News that's coming out or that just came out, has that new Atlas Jeep 7 is reviewed, and I did a profile on EMD's Jeeps of the 50s and pulled from the BL2, which is, the kind of in between an F unit and a Jeep, up to the Jeep 18, and have pictures of them and an explanation of, what came when and what was different about them. And then I think this next Model Railroad News' prototype profile is Erie Lackawanna General Electric U-boats, because Atlas just did the in-scale U-23B, which Erie didn't own, but had ordered, and they were actually on the erecting floor in Pennsylvania when they told GE, oh, sorry about that, we're not going to take them. And they ended up as L&N, but Atlas did a what-if model. So I did 2 pages with Mike Schaefer, who does the diamond for the Erie Lackawanna Society, hooked me up with a motive power expert at the society, and we did a couple pages on here's the real U-boats that Erie Lackawanna actually owned, and show pictures of all of those, and that'll be in November's Model Railroad News, which will be out in just a few weeks.
This is so cool, Shane?
It is, isn't it?
It is so cool. It's like there's 1,000 questions. I could just listen to Tony talk for days and days and days.
Yeah.
So I have a question.
Okay, yeah, go.
If you don't mind.
How
exactly did you get started with Model Railroad News?
I had the website, and I was working at Doc's Caboose here in Kansas, or in the Kansas City area. Mm-hmm. On my days off from Union Station, I would work there at the hobby shop. I'm trying to think now. They were looking for, I didn't know. Oh, Stephen Priest, because Paired Rail does the layout. Paired Rail did the layout for Model Railroad News, and I think they were looking for a new editor. And Stephen Priest had introduced me to the owner of Model Railroad News. And again, that was, I think, the spring of 2011. And within less than a year, White River picked up the magazine. And, and Paired Rail still does Todd Gillette, who I think Shane's a great guy, and does a lot of the layout for Paired Rail, which is why Craftsman and some of those magazines look so good, is Todd has got a great eye for that. Although he's not a railroad person, which he always will remind me of when he says, make sure you label this, because I don't know what an SD45 is versus like a U36B. And it's like, now what? It's like, come on now, Todd, you got to learn all this stuff. Why would you not know that? But he's a great guy to work with.
So Paired Rail is who exactly?
They're in the Kansas City area, and Paired Rail is Stephen Priest and his wife Cynthia Priest.
Oh,
they
okay.
did the Santa Fe, those hardcover Santa Fe motive power books,
right? That
are very hard to find out. I would love to see them redo those. And Cynthia is now the editor of NMRA Scale Rails magazine,
right? And
Stephen is Railroad Model Craftsman's editor. And Paired Rail does production work for the Udaleys at White River. Like I said, they do the layout work for Model Railroad News, and basically both editing and layout for Scale Rails for the NMRA for the contract with White River. So yeah, they're in that. I'm trying to think what other. Seems like there's something else, but I can't think what the other. In addition to Railroad Model Craftsman.
Right. Okay. Shane.
Yes.
Are you ready? I'm going to do some hard-hitting investigative journalism now. Are you ready?
I will get out the notebook.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I'm not going to let this discussion slide about the size of the hobby, because the more you talk, the more fascinated I become with, the Paired Rail, and this guy does that, and that guy does the next thing, and on and on and on. And it's like, you must have some sort of a sense, being as involved in the hobby as you are for as long as you have. I mean, like you said, your dad custom painted locomotives for people. So you must have, maybe you don't have a sense of it. Like I've been in the I'm 63 years old. I'm a particularly good-looking man for my age, but that's not really important.
Wait a minute. Didn't you tell me don't turn on my camera
Yeah.
for our video connection?
Well, I didn't want you to be disappointed in real. So I've been in the hobby since 1959, let's say. And I mean, I have a great history with George's Trains and I wrote for Model Railroader and blah, 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 blah. And I've grappled with forever trying to, especially since I started this podcast, is getting some sort of a sense of how big this hobby is. Like I said to you at the start of the podcast, I am convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt that this hobby right now is growing like crazy because all of a sudden in the last, I would say particularly in the last 5 to 7 years, it's being, so many people are being exposed to it that never would have easily had access to it before. And I think a lot of people are fascinated by miniatures. And the great thing about model railroading is the trains move and everybody's interacted with trains at some point in their life, whether they've had to sit at a railway crossing or whatever. And, the romance of the rails going through the backwoods and all that stuff. Like, being in Model Railroad News and with your new, your collector magazine, I mean, you must have some sense of, or do you grapple with trying to get a sense of how big the hobby is as well?
And that is something I wonder about it. I try to look at it historically as well, because a lot of my research work is digging through old issues of Railroad Model Craftsman or Model Railroader, and you'll see numbers thrown out at times like, this issue, however many copies from whatever year. I don't know. I don't really see. I'm not sure if the NMRA would have estimates or numbers on it. I would agree with you that the proliferation of new companies like Exact Rail, like Tangent Scale Models, like Scale Trains, the kind of that rededication in the last, what has it been, about, I think it's 2002 or so, that Athearn introduces the Genesis line, right. And Horizon Hobby, the big distributor in Champaign, purchased them. What we see now, and I say it frequently in reviews, Dave Audie says it quite a bit in reviews, especially N-Scale, which I'm sure Shane will agree, that it's never been a better time to be an N-Scaler. That I don't know how many times I see that and I say, David, you can't say that about this model because I think you've said this about the last 8 models. It's like, yeah, but this one's just as good. And I think, Shane, we talked at the St. Louis RPM, and I think you just seen, was it the Tier 4 Gevos from Scale Trains?
Yes.
And it's like, wow. And again, yeah, the products we have now, in a way, you'd almost be able to say, HO Collector, why? There was nothing back then that's worth looking at compared to all the stuff that's out today. And yeah, I absolutely agree. In fact, I recently picked up a couple of late 60s. Jim Conway at Concord had his JMC distributing out of Chicago. I picked up like a 66 or 7 catalog of his and a Walthers catalog from the late 60s. In fact, it was one that my dad worked on. He said, I remember that catalog. I worked on it. And going through it, it's like, wow, why would you become a model railroader? Like, there's nothing available. There's
right.
There's so very little here, and yet to me, I think that's so exciting. Would love that opportunity to walk into a Woolco and see those 88-cent AHM blue boxed Roco and Rivarossi freight cars, and yet really to look at it, it's like, well, it's nothing compared to today. I mean, both the performance, the quality, the things that we can do with trains now. Again, it's not hyperbole to say there's never been a better time to be a model railroader. And yes, I think that the market, if you look at Z scale, you look at G scale, both are big growth markets, which, G especially attracts people that are not hobbyists.
Right.
They've got that, backyard barbecue grill, patio, and pond. And wow, wouldn't it be cool if a little train could run around here?
Yeah.
And so they put in a train. But again, that's one of those things that draws people into the hobby. And yeah, I think there's a lot more people out there. There has to be, or there wouldn't be, when you see all these companies and the money in tooling alone that gets invested. If it's not selling, well, there's somebody out there that won the lottery and decided to tool up everything we never had because, well, who's buying it then? I mean, obviously that there is, and it is amazing the dedication we have from these companies trying to make it right, trying to make it better. I mean, again, that's another history angle to look at. Oh, like Lionel, I'm sure you remember the mid-'70s Roco AHM diesels or Atlas diesels.
Right.
That run of like the SD24, SD35s, all those. Oh, wow, they're just amazing. I look at them now and think, well, it's missing steps here out of the cab. Santa Fe never owned this or that, or
Right.
this is not a correct road number. And yet at the time they were just amazing. And yet I think now, and it's like, well, Atlas would never put out, this painted in that road name because it's not correct. And yet it was just not even thought of then. So again, both the people making trains for us and our interest in them is more serious now and is rewarded with these products. Although I think we all are. My sister works with special needs, like autistic,
Right.
and Asperger's kids. And I always say, I think all of us are on the spectrum. Anybody that can get into that kind of minutia, what is it, Sheldon on CBS's The Big Bang?
Right.
It's like, yeah, sadly, that is most of us model railroaders. Anybody that is that into things and knows all that stuff so textbook and can repeat it to you, yeah, I think we're all out there a little bit. But hey, it's fun and we enjoy it, so it's a good thing.
Yeah, and I was never a technical guy. I was never, like Shane will tell you, I can't, I know first generation diesels. I know Jeep 7s and F units and RS1s, but I don't hardly know anything about modern diesels, and I really don't care because I can just ask Shane.
me too. Me too. I'm just about to. He doesn't realize it yet, but I got a stack of Tier 4 from Intermountain and Scale Trains that's coming up as the December cover story for Model Railroad News. I just haven't quite tapped him yet, but yeah, it's like, oh, no problem. I'll get with Shane and we'll get the review put together.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's like Tony, you and I were talking. I've got some of these microtrains well cars that I'm actually tailing up right now.
Oh,
and
yeah.
When we were talking about them, when you came and dropped them off, you said something about when you had first seen them that they were so weird to see, and I kind of looked at you like, sure.
Yes, yeah.
Because for me, those were what the first one. The well runners were designed in 1985 through 86.
Right. I think the SP or somebody, and they had those posts.
Yeah,
Intermountain did the versions with the posts because I guess they were worried the containers would go flying or sliding off, and then realize no, we don't need that. But yeah, I mean, again, and it's funny, Lionel, because I pull up one evening and Shane's out there working like he's drilling or grinding out a speaker housing in a weight or a die-cast frame for some N-scale something or another, and I think I said, well, I got to find you some information, and luckily I think I did. I found an article in Railroad Model Craftsman from the early 90s when they were new, but I said to Shane, I said, boy, when these first hit the rails, it was like something foreign, something futuristic. It's like, what are these weird-looking flat cars with these double-stack containers? Because they were so tall and they looked odd, and yeah, Shane just looked at me like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, yeah, there was a day when it was all box cars that you didn't see things like that. But so no, all of us have that, again, as I said, my analogy to it is being that little kid when I would say, oh no, I like diesels. And the guy would just look at me like, oh, this poor kid.
Yeah.
And, just like walk away like that's sad.
Yeah, I know. Like I say, my experience with George's Trains in Toronto was my dad, he bought me the train set. And pretty quickly, it went from my train set to our train set. And then, he got into, okay, let's sell all this O-scale stuff and get into HO. And I remember being in George's house before he opened the store in 1962. So I would only been 6 or 7. And he had a layout, a good size layout. And he, set the train running so I'd watch it. And I remember being mesmerized by this NW1 going around this layout while he talked business with my dad. And, my dad was hooked. And like you say, back then, that was it. That was what we had. And it's like, so I have a question for you that I think is kind of interesting. Shane, I think you'll think this one's kind of interesting.
Okay.
Yeah. So you're doing all this work. You're basically cataloging the history of model railroading, which again is like one of those things like years from now, people are going to be going, oh my God, thank God Tony Cook did this. And so what do you see as the future of this? Like, do you have, I know you're only in your early 50s, but do you have you started to think of, I need plans to, so, as time rolls on, this keeps going, kind of thing. Does that make any sense?
Oh, exactly. Yeah. I mean, the websites, all that kind of stuff. I mean, luckily, there's Shane.
Right.
What is he about? He's about 20. So
Yeah.
see, once I'm in the retirement home, I'm just going to give him the passwords and all that stuff to it, and he can fill out the in-scale stuff.
Yeah.
Because he knows in-scale, so he'll bring a lot more to it. The future of the hobby, and I think Shane and I have talked about this, and I think this is going to be bigger than DCC. The 3D printing, which right now I've seen some of the stuff. It's very expensive. It's hard to do. But, as you'll remember, Lionel, there was a time when to get something printed on a computer, it was some Commodore 64 or Atari, whatever, and it was this tractor-fed mess, and it was expensive. But I think those 3D printers are going to hit, and the ability to, hopefully we'll get, I know there's a way to scan, like at Union Station, we had something that we could do, like the 3D scans of parts and different things when we needed something for Science City. So the mere thought of taking some odd piece, or whether it's air horns or this or that, and being able to print a perfect can antenna for an ICG Jeep 10 because somebody did a CAD drawing and they emailed it to me. I think that when we talk about the craftsmanship of the hobby shrinking, that everything's ready to run, nobody wants to paint and decal, nobody scratch builds. But then I see some of the work that Shane does, and I'm like, well, thank goodness somebody still is. The younger generation is not just taking things out of boxes. But yeah. I think that 3D printing is going to open a new world to everything. Think of the stuff you'll be able to make. Like getting back to cars, I love cars, but it seems like for the HO vehicles, I'd love to see some of the big 70s, like the Ford Thunderbirds, some of the big Lincolns and things. Nobody really makes them. Or if they do, they're horribly, expensive. I think I've got like a 79 Lincoln Mark V that I paid like $30 or $40 for it, and it's resin cast. But again, we'll be able to make those things with 3D printers.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to bring, whether it's detailing, whether it's, trash barrels for behind a building, you're going to start being able to make parts, share parts on the internet of, hey, I tooled this, 78 Thunderbird up. Here's my CAD files. And what have you got that you trade me for it? That I think that's going to be just a boom to model railroading like you've never seen. And I think it's closer than you think. Again, that technology stuff always seems too expensive, too complex, and too far away. And then the next day you're holding it in your hand and ordering a pizza from it. It's like, oh, wow.
Well, exactly. We've only had my and I pride myself on being an old guy that embraces technology. Like, I just love it. I have to ask Shane how most of the stuff works, but I still love it. And one of the things I noticed is I think the iPad was introduced in like 2010 or 2009. They don't make 737s anymore with screens in the seats. They just stopped doing that 2 years ago. Here's an iPad. If you don't have your iPad or you don't rent one of their tablets, you're not watching anything on that plane.
Right. It again, that's part of that. Oh, the hobby. I think the hobby's this or the hobby's that. It's like, no, you have no idea what's around that next bend. It will change. It will change things so much. When you think about, well, like you say, the iPad, the cell phone. I love old TV shows, and it will surprise me watching like an old episode of Columbo or Dallas or something and thinking, why did they drive all the way to this person's house to tell him something when they could have texted him? Or, well, this person's not aware of this happening. It's like, why didn't somebody call them? It's like, well, they don't have a cell phone. They're in their car someplace.
Yeah.
So again, it's like, think of that world-changing thing of, well, that's not that many years ago. And now I think, well, I'd hate to leave the house without my cell phone. What if I needed to go someplace? How am I going to map this? Or,
exactly.
It's like, wow, I would go without my shoes before I'd go without my phone. That's crazy.
And my son, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, but again, that's, between DCC stuff like this Pico smart control that's using an Android phone as the bottom of its throttle. It's just amazing stuff. And that 3D printing, I think, is going to really set the hobby on its ear as far as things we'll be able to do.
I will. And I was doing those remote podcast interviews, and in Orlando at the train show using the H5. Like Shane says to me, oh, he's gonna, this H5 Zoom thing is really cool. So he got one, and then I thought I got to get one, and he told me how it worked, and he's on my own personal tech support line. When I'm out when I'm out in the field with my, I'll be texting him, Shane, I can't get it to stop blinking. What do I got to do? And I mean, it was just the coolest thing. And I ended up talking to a fella, actually Otto. I interviewed Otto, and then he insisted that I had to talk to Steve Haynes, maybe, I can't remember his last name, from Pico. And I mean, I didn't know as much about Pico as I heard, and I'm thinking, wow. This is cool. You know what I mean? It's like, Pico is a leader in the industry, but it's European. And yet,
right, yeah.
And here they are now. They're cutting a swath of, like, I'm telling you, this hobby is just growing. Like, I hate it. I hate it when people insist that the hobby, like you said at the start of the podcast. Right. Yeah. It's been dying. Actually, as a matter of fact, if I look at my watch, yeah, it's been dying since 1963.
Right.
Like, can we get over that and move on to something else?
Well, and it's interesting that, again, that's such a common thing that so few see. I mean, if you look at, like, HO takes off in the 1950s, but before that, O gauge, because it wasn't even called O scale, we refer to it as O gauge, and even when it was less toy 3-rail but was a scale thing, O was king until after World War II. And as it goes downhill, you see that a lot in articles in the 1950s in the magazines of kind of this lamenting, oh my gosh, what's happening? This upstart HO. I remember reading one where it says it's going to ruin the hobby because HO's coming along and it's dividing up this market that, is only so many people, that we can't make it if we're going to have HO and O, that we need to concentrate on one or the, and it's just funny to read that. It's like, well, man, I hate to say this to you, but N scale is going to show up in the 60s and make your trouble even worse. And poor TT kept threatening to appear during the 60s and forever. And, now there's Z and G. And again, well, where does all this market come from? If in the early 50s they were scared that HO was going to ruin it for everybody because we can't have two scales competing.
Yeah.
So it's a lot bigger than you think.
So, okay, so what do you spend most of your time on? You're involved with 3 magazines, Railroad Model Craftsman. You're associate editor there, right?
Correct. I do the news and the product and book reviews. I oversee them. I don't, I write all the news, and I occasionally do a book or product review, but generally I kind of edit. I put everything together and hand it off to Todd Gillette at Paired Rail to put that together.
Okay, and then you have Model Railroad News, which you're the editor of.
Right, and it's monthly, same as Craftsman, yep.
And that must be a big job being the editor of that.
It is, because it's budget-wise, it's a smaller publication. I basically have like Dave Oddie and Tony Lucio for help on things, and, we've got a few reviewers, but it's, I won't say it's a one-man show, but kind of from cover to cover, my hand's on every page of it, so it takes up a lot of time. And
do you have a favorite new reviewer, perhaps?
There's this kid in the Kansas City area that surprises me a lot, but he's in scale. He's an N-scaler. So I'm afraid to even show him all this HO stuff because it's going to ruin him. He's going to say, oh my gosh, I've been in the wrong scale.
Believe it or not, I actually do have a handful of HO things that lay around the shop here.
He does. He tells me that. I hear that. And as I say, I've got these Tier 4 Gevos that are heading his way. So we'll see. Maybe, And I do the same. The scale I keep dabbling in is, and I don't know why, but is the toy O gauge that I'll pick up Lionel pieces. And others like Menards, the home improvement store, does a lot of O gauge now. And it's like I won't be able to resist it and think, man, I really do need that. I think Lionel did like a made-to-order TP&W Bicentennial Jeep 30, and it's like, what am I going to do with that? And the thing's like $500. It's like, I know, but I got to have it. And so, yeah, I do have this Lionel stuff that I keep moving from one end of my train room to the other thinking, I don't know why I have this O-gauge stuff, but boy, it's really cool.
Yeah. Like, what is that thing where us model railroaders have to buy one of everything because it just
everything, yes. Yes, to have a sample of it. Let me just, I don't need that. That's not my scale, but yeah, I need that.
I was a guest speaker at a thing in, I think it was Pittsburgh. It was in Pittsburgh anyways in the spring. and in their white elephant sale room, I went in there and there was like 4 covered hoppers, Katie covered hoppers, those early ones that, where you first started to drool on these high end, and they were like $23 each. And I'm thinking, I got to buy those. I have no use for them, but I got to buy them,
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
They just look so cool. And so, all right, so you're running, and Shane, just turn around and face the wall there for a minute, will you?
Okay. All right.
So is like Shane not like to just be like the coolest thing on the planet? I mean, to discover this young guy that's like so into the hobby. I mean, there's got to be other guys just like him, like Joel, like Stephen Priest's son Joel is really into the hobby, and
Joel. Yeah, I think Joel was the youngest MMR master model railroader ever. I think, yeah. And Joel, last time I saw him, I almost didn't recognize him because he's now as tall as his dad, and Stephen's pretty tall. And it was like, oh my gosh, it's like Joel. Wow. He's in his teens and has hit that growth spurt, but I think I saw him at a White River dinner we had at Union Station it's been almost a year ago. And again, it's like, that's their son Joel. Wow. But yeah, he's a model railroader too. Yeah.
And I met a young guy in Pittsburgh, Charlie Blanco, I believe his name is, and he was, I mean, there's tons of young guys in the hobby. Mm-hmm. The hobby will never go away. Because
like James, James Wright. Yes. There's another one. James is not, I don't know how old James is, but yeah, he's not an old fogey like us.
No.
And he is amazing with this YouTube channel he's created doing reviews. And again, it's that excitement. And guys will talk about hunting or cars or collecting beer cans, whatever they do. But it seems like model railroading really to start a YouTube channel like James has done and carved out this whole niche for himself of doing product reviews and things is just, I think I saw him do Diecast Masters, just did an SD70 Ace Tier 4.
Right.
Which I'm eager to show to Shane. I've got a sample of it too. And it's, it's what Caterpillar owns Progressive Rail. It's what's left of, I guess, Electromotive Division EMD. And because they have that contract. So it's like, hey, well, we could make diesels too. So they did that. It's this big chunky die-cast metal SD, but it's HO.
Right.
And so you look at it, and at first it's like, well, wait, it looks like an HO model, but it's all shiny, and it's a die. And then it looks like a cookie jar. It's like, it's a die-cast toy. And James did this review where he puts it on the track, gives it power, and of course, it shorts. It turns the DCC off immediately because it's not insulated, but it's fun to see that kind of just that wonder of, look at this, here's something new, and what fun. And I think he brings that to those videos he does. It's always exciting regardless of what he's reviewing, just because there is that excitement and interest that he carries for the hobby, it's a lot of fun.
And when I did this thing in Pittsburgh, and my after dinner speech was social media and model railroading, a new beginning, and Shane gave me statistics from his YouTube channel, and then James gave me the stats from his YouTube channel, and I mean, he's like had 2 million views.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah.
Some crazy number like that. And it's like, it's like incredible. Well, like I say, this podcast, we're approaching, we've been doing it for 3 years. I started it strictly as, hey, I wonder what this would be like. It'd be interesting to see if, a couple dozen people ever listen to it and blah, blah, blah. Because it was mostly for my own personal business. I've been self-employed basically my whole life. In my own business, I was trying to learn social media, and I thought, podcast. I should try maybe a podcast. So, and I mean, we're closing in on 250,000 downloads in 90 plus countries around the world. And you're thinking, okay, trust me, I'm not that interesting.
Isn't it amazing? Yeah.
It's amazing that people will, and I'm constantly saying to Shane and the other guys when we're interviewing, you got to remember when you're making geographical references, it's like there's people all over the world listening to this thing.
Exactly. It's funny you say that because, more and more when you're talking about something, like whether it's prototype or whatever, I will say like in North America, rather than just, well, when these boxcars first hit the rails, it's like, well, they probably didn't hit the rails in, Barcelona. And it's like, oh, yeah, you need to say in, U.S. and Canada or in North America, because it is. And it is amazing, as you say, the numbers you've had for the podcast. It was the same with the websites. When I started the websites in 2000, it was just, this is something you could keep updating. You could add to it. It will be a nice thing just to have. You can access it anywhere. So it's a neat thing. Let's see what it does. And I can't remember when I turned the stuff over for White River to take over those. I was giving them some numbers, and it's a few thousand a day are looking at that site. And when you stop, and those are unique, views each day, and it's like, wow, there's that many people that hit that site. And again, the emails I've had over the years. I mean, some of these I have to look the country up and think, what in the world is that guy doing collecting old Athearn blue boxcars? He lives in Macedonia. It's like, well, I don't even know where that is. But,
well, I don't.
It's amazing.
I don't even know where Kansas is. So there you go. So speaking of 50 years, things being 50 years, somebody keeps trying to tell me that the Pittsburgh Penguins have been in the NHL for 50 years, and I don't think they joined the league except maybe 15, 16 years ago. So that's just you're talking about 50-year things, and it's how time goes by.
It doesn't seem, it just doesn't seem possible. No, it is, that, as I say, like Penn Central being 50 years old, I think we had Conrail was 40 years old last year. Amtrak, and to me, the world's always been Amtrak because it's May of 71. I'm born in 66. So, I'd ridden trains before Amtrak, but by the time I was old enough I can remember yellow, like Milwaukee E units and GM&O E units running through Chicago to St. Louis corridor trains. And that's the only reason I remember them is it was a yellow E unit when it used to be GM&O stuff. I can remember seeing a big sky blue Great Northern Dome car at the Alton, Illinois Amtrak station thinking, wow, this is a long way from home. But again, that Rainbow era Amtrak's the oldest I can remember. So Amtrak's always been, reality. And yet, Mike Schaefer that does Passenger Train Journal, he was there in the late 60s with Jim Boyd and stuff running around shooting those trains as the end of the private passenger train era was. And that's a world that I basically don't, it's like, obviously I know of it from books and things, but I never saw, UP or Santa Fe run a passenger train. That it's always been Amtrak. Yeah. And again, that's that odd, you get those breaks, whether it is like, steam is the thing and I don't like diesels, or again, Amtrak has always been passenger, right? It's like, no, not to a lot of people. They remember private trains.
So what's in the
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
What's the Rainbow era of Amtrak?
Oh my gosh. Somewhere Mike Schaefer just like rolled his eyes or said, now what? In the early 70s, when Amtrak became real in May of 71, which it's amazing when you think about how fast, because you had Penn Central collapsing with their bankruptcy is 1970, I think. But when you think about how slow the government is on doing a lot of things and the debate they take on this stuff, from the National Association of Rail Passengers to the actual start of Amtrak in May 1st of 71 is a really fast timetable that they do it quicker than you think they would. Was it Alan Boyd that was with one of the airlines as the first Amtrak president? They took basically almost everybody's trains with the exception of Southern, who stayed out, Rio Grande that stayed out, and Rock Island that couldn't afford to get in, and began running all the U.S. passenger trains. And at first, like the Santa Fe's combined, like Super Chief El Cap, they were still Santa Fe F units and the high-level El Capitan cars. If you saw the train in 72 or 3, there might be Amtrak paint here or there. And I'll show you some of the pictures sometime, Shane. Or I need to, now that you've said this, what's the Rainbow era? I'm already thinking I got to get a stack of books. I need Journey to Amtrak. I've got to get Mike Schaefer's excellent book on Amtrak at its 20th anniversary because it's got a lot of pictures. That Rainbow era is those trains that were like the GM&O never had dome cars, and GM&O sadly had rebuilt heavyweight passenger cars that were working the Chicago to St. Louis corridor, and Amtrak needed better equipment. And so suddenly there were still some GM&O cars, but they didn't buy any of GM&O stuff, but they took better equipment from other roads that suddenly was surplus and put it on those trains. So suddenly, after having maroon and red GM&O old rebuilt heavyweights, here was a Bud or Pullman Standard Great Northern big sky blue dome car in service because they wanted a dome car on the train. And that Rainbow era would be like a UPE unit, a Seaboard Coastline E unit for the power, maybe a Santa Fe baggage car, a UP Armor Yellow Diner. Rainbow era being that every car was a different color because it was this mix of Penn Central, Santa Fe, Burlington Northern. Everybody that joined Amtrak suddenly got, these weird consists would start showing up, and it was the Rainbow era, which makes it to what Lionel, about 70, 75, 6. It's pretty much painted out, or
yeah, sure,
not as obvious. And when the SDP 40s and the F40s kind of wiped out the E units, and but the Rainbow era was just, and in those days you didn't see, foreign power and things. Now it's nothing to see a CSX unit, in Oregon or Washington State, but as a kid to see a Great Northern car in the middle of Illinois, a passenger car that is, was like, wow, that's might as well be something with bumpers on it that came over here from Germany. It's like, how'd that get here?
It was it was like the golden age of train spotting.
It was. It was a really neat time. Yeah.
And are there books about that? Did you say?
There are, and now that I see that Shane is lacking in this, yes, I'm going to get my old copy. I think it's Kallenbach's Journey to Amtrak, and Mike Shaver in, I think, 91 did a 20-year Amtrak history book that details the trains and how the maps changed and what they did. So definitely those are going to get loaned to Shane to look at, because it's a really neat time, for somebody. Again, for Shane, his world has always been superliners and Amfleet cars. Because what Superliners are 79 and the Amfleet cars are about the same time. So, Heritage Fleet stuff, not really, but yeah, it used to be.
So what's in the future for Mr. Cook, Mr. Tony Cook, the editor of Model Railroad News, the editor of HO Collector? What's it called? HO Collector Quarterly, or what's the technical name?
HO Collector, and its website is hotraincollector.com. Okay. And all of the magazines you can get to by just Googling White River Productions.
Sure.
And you can find all the magazines and their Facebook pages and their websites and that kind of thing.
So what's in the future? Now, are we ever going to have Model Railroad News as a digital copy at all?
It is available yes, you can subscribe to. It's on the Apple newsstand.
Oh, is it?
And it's been available. That's one of the first things I did when I became editor. I think we started that, might have been before or right after the U Dailies at White River purchased the magazine. That it's been available on the Apple newsstand and does well. It is, you can read it on your iPad or your computer. Digital delivery of all the magazines is something we're looking for, that best way, the most optimal way of doing it. So I think like HO Collector right now has no digital, but it's something in the works.
Okay, cool. I'm going to look up Model Railroad News, because that would be cool to see on my computer. I mean, I understand that, but I mean, keeping these magazines going, like you're right, like people are always going to want, I don't care. I might not be a guy that wants to necessarily have a paper, but I'll tell you, the quality of the magazines, like I've said this to Otto, Rail Fan and Railroad, or is it Railroad and Rail Fan? I can never remember.
Rail Fan and Railroad.
Yeah. I just walk up to Otto and go, and he goes, Rail Fan and Railroad. Okay. But the quality of the magazines is just staggering. I mean, it's like something, Kevin has really hit on to, it's like something it's like you feel like, oh, I got to buy it because it's so cool looking, and that's something that I think, boy, you guys, you got to put in a good word for me for Kevin. I think I got to get him on the podcast too.
I think that would be a good idea. Well, and the growing on the magazines is one thing that, again, when people think, oh, magazines, that's something that's got to be losing ground with the internet. Model Railroad News this past spring just expanded to another 175 locations in North America for Barnes & Noble stores that we were not in before. And that's based on, obviously the sales were strong enough at the current locations that we have a distributor that does the magazine stuff, and I don't understand it all. But yeah, it's moved to those new locations, or, expanded its distribution, because again, that's that, well, what's this stuff about the hobby being in trouble? It's like, well, here's something that does nothing but talk about new products, for the hobby. And it just moved into, almost 200 new locations of Barnes and Noble, and it's like, well, yeah, that's obviously a hobby that's dying.
Yeah. So you hear that, Shane? Get your reviews done properly because lots of people are reading them.
Yes, I'm feverishly retouching parts of my reviews.
Attaboy. Attaboy. So what's in the future, the immediate future for Mr. Cook? Or are you just working away, or what's kind of things that got you excited?
I would like to do a book project. And my dad was a long-time photographer, and I've helped on some book projects for other people, but I would love to get some of Dad's work done as a book, and the Dailies and we've talked about it, but that's, again, it's always one more thing to work into the schedule, but yeah, I would love to see a hardcover book done for my dad.
That would be very cool. That'd be a cool thing to work on. And see, we never even got a chance to talk about that, but I mean, I had another fellow we interviewed. He works for the Kansas City Southern, and we started talking. And his grandfather was a rail fan, and his dad was a rail. And it's like really, seriously, like, I mean, when I started this podcast, I thought, okay, this is going to be interesting. And it's like now, it's just like I could be talking to somebody every night for the rest of my life and not even get close to touching the surface of everybody there is to talk to. So okay, so a book project with your dad's photos. Now that sounds cool. That sounds like it would sell What did he photograph primarily? Or was it just all over? Or?
It would be the Midwest. So,
right.
Old N&W, TP&W, Santa Fe, Mopac, early Amtrak stuff, Illinois Central Gulf, GM&O.
Is there a trick to maintaining slides like Kodachrome? Can they be maintained for years and years and years?
The collection at White River is stored in an environmentally sealed situation. So, I take the slides in and out to go through and sort them. You still have got the fade problem because it's, 35 millimeter film. There's really no way to stop that. Certainly don't want them sitting out in the sun or,
right.
Exposed to moisture and such. But I'm in the process right now of I'm working and scanning a lot of late 60s, early 70s slides of my dad's. And it's surprising how many of the old Kodachrome and Ektachrome slides still look great. And then occasionally you run into some that, wow, they've turned pink or yellow. But the amazing thing with that now, of course, is, Photoshop and our technology.
Right. Yeah.
That you can take a slide that was underexposed or, overexposed and color corrected. And, we can make a lot of things work that otherwise years ago would have been, well, toss that in the trash, it's turned pink and you can't save it. So in a way, not that, the film's going to last forever, but digitizing it and getting it scanned at high resolution. And that's part of the process that I'm helping Kevin Udaly with, is that sorting, scanning, preserving that stuff for the future.
Have you been doing...
And he, by the way, that's one of his things is, we take in those kind of slide collections because, there's a lot of guys that shot slides, and then, once they're gone, the family doesn't know what to do with them, or, we don't know what's here. And again, the worst thing is to have spent that time, enjoyed the trains, took the pictures, and then have them end up in a dumpster because, well, nobody knew what that was. It was just a box of those little cardboard slides.
Yeah.
So that's one that we actively are trying to preserve, anything and everything we can. And so, yeah, there's almost always a new box of something when I go out to work on slides that, again, it's somebody's memories. That was their fun. And it's now sitting, in a slide box and needs to be preserved. It shouldn't go away. Wow. Again, it's history.
This is cool, eh, Shane?
Very much, yes.
Very, very cool. All right, so I really like that idea of your dad's slides in a book. That is a really cool idea. Have you ever met Jim Udaly? Have you ever been to Jim Udaly's layout?
Oh my gosh! There again, I almost can't go. I can't go there because it's O gauge. It's O gauge C&O, and I look at it, and then of course, not only is it O gauge, it's good 2-rail scale, which appeals to me. And he's got all those awesome early 70s Roco Atlas F9s. And it's like, oh man, that's so cool.
I know.
Yeah, that's dangerous for me to go over there because then suddenly it's like, I don't really need a dining room, but this would be so awesome as an O-gauge layout. So, yeah, in fact, it's funny you mentioned Jim. I did a piece on Atlas, just did a new O-gauge F7, and our From the Archive in that Model Railroad News was that early 70s Atlas Roco made O-scale,
right.
And they had an F9A, and I think I had in my collection either a Santa Fe or a UP, And there were only 4 road names. They did like BN, Santa Fe, UP, and C&O. And I thought, I'd really like to have these. And since I'm doing that archive piece, I'm going to fill out my collection so I can shoot pictures of them. And I got that C&O, which I'd never really seen or had much exposure to. And it's the blue with the yellow, that wave band over the nose paint scheme. And I contacted Kevin about it, saying, now, what was how it seems like some of the times the band is higher than others. And his dad, explained that, there's like 3 variations of that scheme. And again, he has a tremendous layout. That O scale is awesome, really awesome.
My favorite story about that is I don't know, it's going to be 20 years ago. A bunch of my guys, maybe 6 or 7 of us or 5 of us, went to Kansas City to do a bunch of layouts, and we saw Chuck Hitchcock and some guys, and they hadn't. Somebody said to me, it was just for like 2 days or 3 days we were there. And on the Saturday, we were supposed to do this layout in the morning and then another layout in the afternoon and a different layout. And somebody kind of leaned into me and said, you need to go see Jim Daly's layout. So somehow we got a hold of him, and we decided, well, we'd just stop in and make an appearance at lunchtime. And of course, we get there and we go into this building, and then Jim is Jim. He's just a great guy. And then he says, 5 minutes in, he says, hey, you want to run a train? And we're like, yeah. And then, of course, he fires the whole thing up. I'm running like a 30-car coal hopper drag at C&O with Jeep 7s on the front, and I crest the summit. And, with the O scale, the couplers are picking up the slack as it goes down the hill.
Oh, yeah.
And, I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. So then, the hour is running out, and somebody says, well, we got to go to the next layout. And I said, you know what? Tell them we died in a horrible car crash. And we'll just stay here. It was like just an unbelievable layout. Just,
Well, and Kansas City is just, I don't remember. I'm sure there were in St. Louis, but like growing up, I don't remember that concentration.
Oh.
As you say, like Chuck Hitchcock, Jim Daly's. I mean, there are, the name's escaping me now. He's got a Pensy layout, I think, and he's got
Doug
a narrow
Taylor?
gauge. Yes, Doug Taylor.
Yes, we were just over there the other weekend.
I mean, there's so many. I mean, Kansas City, it's almost like what's in the water. That
I know.
Well, and it's an odd, going back to when I worked at AMC Theaters, Kansas City had the best per capita movie attendance of any place in the Midwest. Like if you're going to build a movie theater, don't do it in Omaha, St. Louis, Oklahoma City, Kansas City. People go to the movies more. And they look at like the Chiefs and the fandom there, and then like model railroading. There seems to be this passion for whatever it is that, I mean, Kansas City and its model railroads, I'm sure every place has got some.
Yep.
But I don't know that even great places like Denver, where you got that influence of narrow gauge and Rio Grande, I know there's some great layouts there, but like the NMRA convention next summer is in Kansas City, and if you've been following in Railroad Model Craftsman, Stephen Priest has been presenting a number of these Kansas City layouts. Oh, yeah. And I know a lot of those guys, but everyone I look at, I'm like, wow, here's another great layout that I'd forgotten about that's right here in the Kansas City area. It's almost like, well, who doesn't have a great layout in Kansas? Well, me, I don't. But,
Two of us. There's 2 of us.
Yes. And Shane, but yeah. Now, mine, I have the excuse. I have a 4x8 painted green board. And when somebody says, well, how come you don't have a layout? Well, because it's got Cato HO track on it now to test HO, but I probably have to unsnap all that and put in scale down for the next thing I'm testing. So mine has to kind of be convertible. So it changes quite a bit.
My thing. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's why there's nothing nailed or glued down.
Yeah.
It's here today, but once I get through with this review, it'll be something else.
Well, and my thing is like when I first met Shane and he was in Kansas City, and of course, I started talking to him. I'm thinking, this kid is like this kid. So I'm thinking he knows all these people because he's in Kansas City, and he doesn't really know anybody. And of course, now he's being discovered since I've known him in the last 14 months, he's being discovered, and he starts telling me he's been to this layout and he's met this guy, and this guy's asked him, and I'm thinking, yeah, okay, but I was the guy that discovered him in Sweden in the minor leagues. Like, let's everybody just calm down. I was the guy that found Tom Brady. So let's just everybody relax here and remember who pulled him out of the minors. All right. We got to stop now because we've been talking and talking and talking, and it's been an hour and a half. And so, Shane, can you give out our email address?
I can, but I warn you now, I still don't have anything catchy. So
All right.
You've been forewarned. But if you guys would like to send us your thoughts, opinions, and or comments, you can send them to a modellerslife@gmail.com. That's modelers with one L.
Like Railroad. Not two L's like Lionel. How about that?
That works.
That's not bad.
That works.
That's not,
There's some trimming to do, but I think that'll do for now.
Yeah, we got to get some trimming to do, but that's a good start. And we have our Facebook page, A Modeler's Life, or you can go to facebook.com/Modeler's Life. And we have our website, amodellerslife.com.
Mm-hmm.
And we're on Patreon at patreon.com/Modeler's Life. Tony, that's a place where I was running out of space to put stuff. And also I was thinking, I've been doing this for free for a while. So we actually sell some of our podcasts now. So that's where we do. So it turns out not everybody wants to pay for podcasts, but quite a few people do. And so we enjoy that, and there's lots of stuff there. So it's an exciting world we're a part of now.
Very much. I'll have to get Tony at some point. I'll try and get you that email show so you can hear exactly how Lionel and I met. It's a flooring story.
Yeah. So that's Tony. That was awesome. I knew it would be as soon as I started figuring out, hey, I got to get a hold of this guy. And I mean, it's so many people, but like your story, man, we're going to be talking to you again because I love this thing that you're doing with, preserving the history of HO scale. Like that is a cool thing. I'm telling you, that is the thing where people are going to go, yeah, what's that all about? And then they're going to and then if it wasn't there, they'd be going, some guy should have preserved all this and kept track of it.
Well, I'm very glad to be here. I appreciate the time, and I hope you guys will have me back.
Absolutely, we will. All right, so now we have one last important job for you. And I'm sure you've listened to every one of our podcasts. Like I have no doubt you've listened to every one of them, some of them twice. We actually have a fella in... Yeah, what are you laughing at?
I like how we just kind of go, yeah, sure.
I have heard a few of them. Yes, I have heard a few of them, but yeah, I've not heard every single one of them. No,
we have a fella in Green Bay, Mike Wachowski, and I said his name correctly the very first time I talked to him. And he drives from Green Bay to Sheboygan every day. He runs a hospital. He's a shift for his shift. He runs a hospital. Which actually I kind of find unnerving if you know Mike. He's actually a very good guy. He's a great guy. Anyways, he's listened to them. He's on his second time around because when he drives back and forth, he has a 62-mile commute. So it gives him something to listen to. So he's our resident expert, I think, on the podcast. And then of course there's two other guys in Green Bay, Mike Ostertag and Luke Lemons. That's a whole different story. These two knuckleheads, they decided they don't need to buy their wives flowers on Valentine's Day.
That's a risk. That's risky. I'd get a second opinion.
Yeah, it's
high risk, no reward.
Yeah, high risk, no reward. Couple of good guys, and we had fun with them on that. I actually interviewed them both on Valentine's Day, and I said, so what, I started with the first guy, Luke, and I said, so did you get your wife flowers? And he goes, no. I says, okay, Luke, put down the microphone, step away from the computer, and go out and get your wife flowers right now. So why did I tell? Oh, yeah. So anyways, Mike, Mike has listened to, he's working on his second time around. And somebody else, Chris Atkins in Argyle, Texas, he told me that we've got like 6 days worth of podcasts. And I'm thinking, holy moly, Mike. You managed to listen to all of that, and now you're working on your second time through? I mean, seriously. You've got to have something better to do with your time than listening to me. So anyways, now we have a really difficult job for you. And what you have to do at the opportune time is you have to say, happy rails to you.
Okay.
So you'll know when that time is, but it's key. It's happy rails to you. I mean, I'm sure you could add it, you could change it and put in your own inflection or whatever, but it's happy rails to you.
Okay.
Don't jump the gun. I did that and I got in trouble for it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, okay. All right. Well, Tony, as we close the barn doors on another episode of A Modeler's Life, and the sun slowly sets over the back 40, I guess there's nothing else left to do except for you to say,
Happy rails to you.
That was great. That was great. I loved listening to that interview again. I listened to it on, I had to drive to the city today, so I had plenty of time to listen to it. Sound quality was good. I like listening to these interviews when they're easy to listen to. There was hardly any editing to do. Lots and lots of fun. I love the part when Tony asks, he says, towards the end, he says, I hope you'll have me back. Yeah, Tony, we'll have you back. We had you back. Over and over and over again, we had you back. It's great. You've been a huge part of you've been a huge addition to a great addition to the podcast. And then when we asked him to do Happy Rails and we'd say, okay, there's something you got to do. And he goes, okay. It's funny to listen to him now, 8 months later, after he's become a part of the network. Just fun. All right. I think we gave the email address out on the show. I'll give it again. modellerslife@gmail.com. That's modelers with one L like Lionel, not two L's like, no, wait a minute. That's one L like railroad, not two L's like Lionel. We got our website, modellerslife.com. There you can go to our Patreon page, sign up for that. You'll get some extra podcasts if you just can't get enough of us. And there's a link to our Facebook page, and that's it. So say hi to the kids when you get home. Make sure you stop and get the groceries. Give the wife a little kiss on the cheek. Pet the dog. And drive carefully. Okay. See ya.
It's another Lincoln Homer.